Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Symposium on California's low-carbon fuel standard, sponsored by Fueling California. I'm Bob Sturtz. I'm the chairman of Fueling California, and I'm also the managing director of strategic sourcing fuel for United Airlines. And I will be moderating the panel discussions today. Fueling California is a nonprofit that provides a united voice on behalf of major fuel consumers. We engage actively in debate on public policies that involve the content, availability, and supply of fuel. We also are advancing alternative fuels and technologies. The board of Fueling California consists of 10 members. UPS, Union Pacific Railroad, United Airlines, Chevron, Conway Trucking, American Presidential Lines, Avis Budget Rental Car, a retired executive from AAA, as well as Harris Ranch and Walmart. As you can see, we represent almost every aspect of transportation. The Board of California represents employment of over 500,000 California residents and also revenues, tax revenues, of over $3 billion. As you know, in 2006, legislator passed and then Governor Schwarzenegger signed AB 32, the Global Warming Solutions Act of 2006, which set the 2020 greenhouse gas emission reduction goals into law. It directed the California Air Resources Board to begin developing early actions to reduce greenhouse gases while also preparing a scoping plan to identify how best to reach the 2020 limit. The reduction measures to meet the 2020 target were adopted at the beginning of 2011. With the low carbon fuel standard implementation underway, this is a critical time to provide an audience specific details on the low carbon fuel standard, as well as create an environment for all the stakeholders, regulators, and policymakers to discuss the impact and benefits of the low carbon fuel standard from their own perspectives. As a group that represents some of the largest fuel consumers in the country and California, Fueling California wanted to provide a well-balanced public dialogue from experts on this issue to help raise the awareness of California's low-carbon fuel standard program. With that said, we have a very busy morning ahead of us. We have 3 panels and a luncheon panel that will highlight leading academia and economists on the subject. Thank you very much to the speakers for participating this morning, and thank you, the audience, for attending this very important event. With that, I'd like to begin the first panel, and that's titled The Low Carbon Fuel Standard, Setting the Stage. This panel will provide an overview of California's low carbon fuel standard program regulation that we are, and where we are today. Each panelist will provide a short introduction, and once they've provided their perspectives on the subject, I will conduct a panel Q&A, and those questions that I will ask will be questions that have either been provided by the panelists or by Fueling California. After that, we'll entertain questions from the audience. With that, it's my pleasure to introduce the panel 1 speakers. Mr. Richard Corey, the Deputy Executive Officer with the California Air Resources Board. Senator Ted Gaines, the Vice Chair of the Senate Transportation and Housing Committee. Assemblymember Jose Solario, Assembly Transportation Committee member. Assemblymember Susan Bonilla, Assembly Transportation Committee member. And Mr. Dario Fromer, the Chairman of the California Transport Commission. With that, I'd like to ask Mr. Corey to begin the discussion.
All right. Well, thank you for having me here. I look forward to the opportunity to speak with you all, and in fact, many familiar faces here. My objective was to provide real brief background on the fuels effort, but to emphasize important facts concerning the low carbon fuel standard. First, liquid fuels play a critical role in our economy. That's a fact, and they'll continue to for many years to come. California's refining sector has led innovation efforts that have resulted in much cleaner fuels in the state. The actions taken by industry, government, and stakeholders to clean up fuels improved air quality, and it's improved public health. And together with the motor vehicle standards that work in conjunction with fuel standards, the air is cleaner, vehicles are more efficient, and there's a savings due to fuel expenses. Low carbon fuel standard is part of an overall strategy to meet the requirements of AB 32. The regulation isn't new, was considered and approved by the board in 2009 with reporting requirements beginning in 2010. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. The objectives of the low carbon fuel standard are to reduce the carbon intensity of fuels by 10% by 2020. It reduces greenhouse gas emissions by 15 million metric tons, representing about 20% of the AB 32 target. So it's the third largest GHG reduction measure. It also improves or increases energy diversity in the state and encourages innovation. It was designed with flexibility in mind, meaning that it's not prescriptive. Industry has the flexibility to take the path that makes most sense to them from a compliance standpoint. It's important to note there are many paths to compliance, and we'll be talking more about that in a minute as well. It was also developed in the context of a transparent process. And this is over years that continue to rely on active stakeholder engagement. All proposals were developed in a workshop, open public process setting, documents posted on the web, both draft and final, and versions of drafts. All regulatory actions considered by the board, fully vetted, considered in a public hearing context, with all stakeholder comments documented, responded to, and reported on. I have, over the years, had the opportunity to work with many of the people represented here, and really look forward to continue to do that. Now, briefly on the program status, where are we? The program's working. Industry is over-complying and has accrued over 500,000 credits. The carbon intensity of fuels used is actually lower than that we expected at this stage, and albeit it's an early stage of the program. Fuels that are helping to generate credits include lower carbon intensity ethanol, natural gas, electricity. In fact, 14% of the credits generated are from natural gas, biodiesel, and electricity. It's also venture capital that's being attracted to the state in terms of biofuel-related investments. In fact, California is attracting about 1/3 of the venture capital in North America for biofuel-related investments. But many of these investors have expressed the need for regulatory certainty and the need to stand by standards for those investments to continue to come to the state. California, and this is an important point, just completed a year-long effort in 2011 to evaluate the status of the implementation of the program. This was part of one of two formal reviews that required in the regulation, and was done in conjunction with the 40-member panel, the Low Carbon Fuel Standard Advisory Panel. So over the course of the year, we looked at key questions. What's the status of the program? Are the fuels available, needed to comply? Are adjustments necessary in terms of the carbon intensity reduction targets? Are other adjustments necessary with respect to the program? And clearly, with the diversity that was represented on that panel, there's clearly a diverse perspective that we've documented in a report based on that panel's work that was shared with the advisory panel and is posted on the website. Key points that came from that discussion were the need to carefully monitor the program, the fact the program is very early in its stages, the reduction in carbon intensities are modest in the early years, There are multiple pathways to comply with the reg, but it is something to continue to monitor in terms of investments and in terms of the availability of biofuels. We're continuing to work with stakeholders for adjustments to further refine the program that we brought to the board this past December. And we're also regularly reporting to the board and other stakeholders in terms of the ongoing status of implementation. And as I mentioned, there's also a follow-on review of the program required prior to January 1 of 2015, and that can be as early as necessary. So in sum, the programs, although early, is generated the type of response that was anticipated. There's value on lower carbon intensity fuels. That's being recognized. Credits are being accrued, and we're continuing to monitor the program and working very closely with stakeholders. That sums my opening comments.
Thank you. Thank you. Senator Gaines.
Great. Yeah, thank you very much for having me this morning. And I have the pleasure of being the Vice Chair of Transportation in the Senate, and really believe in infrastructure and often a critic of regulation. But clearly, there are benefits to regulation. I just want to make sure that we implement them in such a way that we have an efficient economy and we compete throughout the world. And when we take a look at energy, the success of any society is always having cheap energy, and that's what grows your economy. And so when we introduce AB 32 and look at the implementation of what is really a tax, then the question is, can you create the efficiencies within your economy so you still have a manufacturing base? And I'm very concerned about that and the nature of our economy in the state of California, because I think we have really are challenging the lower and middle class aspects of our economy in raising energy costs to them. And then the question is, can you provide competitive manufacturing within California that produces a product that is competitive with China, for instance? And we know the challenges that they have as far as energy is concerned and production of coal-burning plants, and a lot of their particulate matter ending up in the LA basin, for instance, and they've got a long way to go in terms of improving their environment. Certainly, CARB has done good things in terms of requiring air quality control and things of that nature. All you got to do is drive behind a classic automobile, which I love. I'm a big car guy, but the catalytic converter has taken us huge strides in terms of cleaning our air. So I get back to the economy and how do we remain competitive? How do we maintain manufacturing given the higher threshold for any manufacturer in California? And is it, you know, we have so much success in the Silicon Valley. These are highly educated people earning very good money. But what is happening to our economy? What's happening to our society? And are we becoming bifurcated with a young, uneducated, lower class, and then people who are educated making good money? And I think that all fits into this matrix with AB 32. It's estimated, from what I've read, that this will generate anywhere from $1 to $10 billion of revenue. And so that's revenue that's coming from somewhere by creating a market that didn't exist before. It's not a natural market in a free market economy. It's a created market by government. And so these raise questions in terms of our ability to remain competitive. Who pays that ultimate tax? And then how is that money spent? And I'm disturbed when I take a look at our state budget, even though I'm a critic of AB 32, to see that money going into the general fund. Seems to me that we ought to be focusing on research. I'm a real believer in basic research, and that ought to be government sponsored, and that research could be used throughout the marketplace by entrepreneurs. And we've had great success through our educational system and their ability to create patents and new technologies and using the private sector to launch forward with that. So it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for giving me an opportunity to speak.
Thank you. Assemblyman Solorio.
Thank you. Good morning. My name is Jose Solorio. I like to say I represent the happiest place on earth, Disneyland. I represent Anaheim, Garden Grove, and San Ana, so it's a true story. I do represent the happiest place on earth. Professionally, before coming up here, I worked for the Orange County Transportation Authority for 8 years, San Ana council member, and then up here in the Assembly, it's my 6th year, and I've been on the Transportation Committee this whole time, so I've seen a lot of this play out. I want to thank you all for fueling California, because you really do, as oil producers, importers, folks in the logistics, trucking, manufacturing area. I was thinking, yesterday and thinking about this topic that, really a key requirement of a free and democratic society is the ability for the movement of goods and people. And so you all here and the fuel that is required to move people in California and this country is absolutely vital to our economy and to our democratic society. As I think about AB 32 and the low carbon fuel standard, I think they have great benefits, and definitely we do need to address this area. As you might know, transportation, for example, accounts for 40% of California's greenhouse gases. More than 90% of our vehicles rely on petroleum-based fuels. And so it's an area that we do need to address through this low carbon fuel standard. But the question is, at what cost and at what timeline? Sometimes, we want to buy a new home. Maybe it's $1 million home or $2 million homes, but can you afford it tomorrow? Maybe not. Right? So you need to save for it. You need to put your own financing plan. You need to work towards that. You don't force yourself to buy something that you're maybe financially not ready for. I would suggest, too, that what we're doing in this area, too, because it's going to get extremely costly, and we're going to have to look at, bringing in more and more fuels from out of the country at a very expensive price. And this reminds me, too, there's a lot of similarities with what's going on in this area to the renewable energy side. There we have some, pretty aggressive goals for having higher rates of our electricity generation coming from renewable sources. But guess what? When we, as a general public or as a legislature, look at these goals, we don't say, but do you want it with an increase in prices of 25 to 40 to 50%? We don't talk about that part. We set up the goals, and then we let maybe an agency or others figure out how to get there and at what cost. And I think these are all very worthwhile goals, but we need to be more mindful of the timelines. How can we make it affordable? Also on how we create alternatives to getting there. Many of you might have seen an op-ed I did for the Orange County Register talking about how CARB is trying to force oil producers and importers on creating hydrogen infrastructure at fuel stations. Even though the fuel stations may not want them, even though common folks like ourselves up here, probably can't afford these $1 million hydrogen cars. And so why are we doing it, and who's going to benefit, and again, at what cost and at what timeline? These are all things of great importance. I would share with you that as you continue to work with CARB and agencies like CARB, a few things. One, keep working with them, because we've given them so much power and authority, but keep us posted when they're overreaching, when they are pushing their authority. It is from time to time that between moderate Democrats, of which I'm a moderate Democrat, and there are others that are willing to push back on these bureaucracies when they push their authority. We need to know about that. I would also suggest that sometimes industry needs to find friends in making their case on some of these arguments. They could be local officials, state officials. They could be our friends in labor, particularly on the building trade side. We want to drive, we want to build, and there are partnerships there. And then the media. Sometimes we really need to not just be in that boardroom, in that agency meeting room, in a long hearing, but we need to work more collaboratively with the media to bring our case forward. Let me just close by saying you do have friends in the legislature. We all are mindful of the environmental goals that this state does want and does need, but we need to continue to work with the business community. We need to work with community leaders in making sure that we have an economy that's sustainable today but far into the future. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you. Assembly Member Bonilla.
Thank you. I appreciate all of you being here this morning. I was briefly wondering why in the world I was here. I know why all of you are here. And I know it's because I'm in the legislature. But really, I wanted to kind of share with you my interest. And it really is because of the district I represent. I was thinking about the expensive car you were discussing and thought, well, no, that wouldn't be something that would be pulling into my garage. I continue to drive my 2000 Honda minivan up here, and I think that that kind of represents the district that I represent here in the legislature. And how are they going to look at this? How are they going to understand what we're attempting to do? And I think it's always very important when you're in a position of leadership to understand that if you're leading and no one is following you, you're not going to get very far. And I think that we can have incredible vision, we can have very good goals, we can agree on a lot of very important points. But if we aren't engaging our public, if we aren't engaging our constituency, and if I'm not representing and also hearing from my constituency and bringing that to the table, then we're not going to achieve all of the lofty goals. Or we may achieve them, but my gosh, it's going to be a mess along the way. And so I'm here today, I think, just to kind of represent the person who's not in the field, but I'm certainly representing Contra Costa County, the 11th Assembly District. We have 4 oil refineries in my district, and we have a lot of manufacturing. Most people don't think of the Bay Area that way, but we also have beautiful open space. We've worked very hard. We're environmentally conscious within my community, but at the same time, there's a lot of folks working jobs that are very, very important to them, their families, to the economy. And so for me, it is about achieving that balance between our workforce, our local economy, and the regular people who live in my district like me, who I see every day in Concord and the surrounding cities. I think we all agree on the environmental benefits. We all agree that we have to take bold steps. We need to set the bar high. You're not going to ever achieve something if you're just going for the lowest common denominator. You'll fall short of it. So we certainly agree on that. We agree on the environmental goals that we want. I'm a grandmother. I want my grandchildren to enjoy, to live in California in a place that's beautiful, where the air is clean, where we're moving into the future, and I want that to be part of my legacy as well. But I thought of the topic, the panel title is setting the stage, and I have to refer back to the fact that I was a high school English teacher, taught in Concord before I came up here, before I went on the Board of Supervisors, and taught a lot of Shakespeare. And so I think that as we think about setting the stage, we're at a really critical point in time in this dialogue and discussion. And I know we talked about the importance of public dialogue. Well, we're a long way from any kind of public dialogue. No one out there knows what in the world you're talking about today. They don't know any of your acronyms. They don't know where you're trying to get. And until we truly engage the public, we are still a long way. So we really are setting the stage. And if you think of a Shakespearean stage and what you're going to put out there, who's going to be the cast of characters? Don't be afraid of conflict. It's part of every wonderful, great story. Okay, we're not going to move this state into the future without conflict. I think the goal is, how are we going to resolve the conflict? Is this going to become a classic or a comedy? So we really do have some things we can learn from the past and from human nature, and we don't have to repeat mistakes of the past. We can right now be thoughtful in how we set the stage. Now, my analogy breaks down because we don't just have an audience sitting out there who are going to applaud and then walk out and go home. They're actually part of the cast of characters. They're driving the cars, they're living in the communities, they're working in the jobs. So it's very, very important, not just to have a dialogue, but educate our entire public. To this end, I became aware of that, and because I'm a teacher, I guess I'll do any little bit of educating I can squeeze into my job. And we had a forum on AB 32 and cap and trade in the city of Concord. We partnered with our business community. We're going to have a second forum in Fresno, and we're hoping to follow up with another one in Los Angeles, bringing the stakeholders together. And what's my goal? To get the public there as a stakeholder, to realize they're still not really represented at this table, and that we need to not only get them represented, but if we're going to have any kind of success in making these enormous and important environmental advances, they have to embrace what we're talking about here, because they're going to be part of the entire production. And so that's really why I'm here today, is to represent those folks, to think about how do we actually develop stakeholders that we don't see here today. How do we avoid unintended consequence? How do we really have a powerful and strong and meaningful public dialogue? As we look at implementation, how do we achieve the best possible outcome with balance from all the stakeholders and what they have to contribute and what they have to say? I think this is far too an important topic for us to not be extremely thoughtful and strategic in how we move forward. And so I'm here in Sacramento representing my constituency, but I think I represent a lot of people in California. I think I represent a lot of the folks who we want to make sure don't wake up one day and say, what happened? And has anyone watched the movie Network recently? Remember 1976? We really don't want them throwing their windows open and sticking their head out and screaming, I'm not going to say it, but if you're old enough, you remember. But there's always that potential, isn't there? There's always the potential that when people feel they don't understand, that they haven't been included, that they haven't bought in. You know, as a teacher, if I try to teach something and my students had no questions, I might as well just be, talking to a wall. You have to have a question in order to embrace an answer, and you have to feel a need in order to want a solution. And until we achieve that with the public of California, we're really not going to achieve the wonderful goals that we could. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for those great comments. Mr. Frommer?
Well, thank you very much. I don't recall my high school English teacher being nearly as sophisticated and articulate as Assemblywoman Bonilla. I'm going to take your audit your class someday. Good morning. I'm Dario Frommer. I think I've been asked to come here today in my capacity as a member of the California Transportation Commission in the immediate past chair, but it might be more relevant to talk about my experience as the only legislator in this room who was a co-author of AB 32 when I was in the legislature. So you all blame me. These people had nothing to do with the headaches that we're facing today. Having said that, it's been interesting to sit at a vantage point from 2006 when we wrote the bill, when we struggled to round up the votes. My job at the time as the majority leader was to herd the cats and get the bill out, and where we are today. In 2006, California was looking at leading the country and being one of the first states to pass a mandate of reducing greenhouse gas emissions, and we did that. But the assumption at that time is that pretty soon in Washington we would have an administration that would look at these issues and enact a national program to limit greenhouse gases. And as we all know, that has not happened. Far from it. We've almost gone in the opposite direction. So California finds itself today, under 32, moving forward. And we're pretty much moving forward by ourselves. And that is a great opportunity for us to do some incredible innovation on a very important issue. And I think if you saw the report that came out from scientists just a week ago, we all realize that we have major challenges with climate that we have to address. That gives us a chance, as I said, to innovate, to create incentives and programs that will bring new industries and bring jobs and bring benefits. But it also creates peril for us as a state that is going forward without too many people following behind us at this time. And one of the things that we have to be mindful of as we move forward is that 32 does have language, intent, and mandate that does allow for flexibility. And this is something that Mr. Corey talked about a few minutes ago. We're going to have to be very mindful with all our partners across the state of how we move forward to this to make sure we do it in the best way possible, in a way that's not going to harm the economy, in the way that we get the most efficiency, while at the same time incentivizing the reductions of greenhouse gas emissions, which I think many of us feel are so important. And so as we move forward here, we're going to have to take a number of things into consideration. We did not contemplate the low carbon fuel standard when we were in the legislature. We argued a lot about cap and trade and market mechanisms to create a way for us to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. The low carbon fuel standard was put forward by Governor Schwarzenegger in 2007 via an executive order. It is authorized by AB 32, obviously, but that was an executive order. It was not a specific part of the legislation. And as some of you know, low carbon fuel standard is being litigated in the courts right now. There was at least one lawsuit, or 3 lawsuits I think were consolidated into one. It's now in the U.S. District Court, the Eastern District. Now for people who are, like myself, lawyers, you can't count on the courts overturning something or tweaking something and getting some result there. It's probably better if the stakeholders come together, as we're seeing here today, and work together to make sure that things move smoothly. And I think that this opening dialogue here is extremely important for us, because we're going to have to talk about what happens both to the economy and on some collateral issues that will happen as we move forward. One of the issues I will now put on my hat as the Transportation Commission member is the Transportation Commission is not responsible for implementing 32, except one little corner of it. We are working to create guidelines on another companion measure, which is SB 375, that has to do with local government and regional government planning, and they're taking into account the results of their planning on greenhouse gas emissions. And I see that my staffer, Susan Vranson's here, who did all the work on that, did a fabulous job with all the local agencies. So we're working on that piece of it. But the collateral issue that we are dealing with now has to do with the cost of transportation fuel. As many of you know, in California, we get most of our funds, state funds for highways and transit, from the excise taxes that we charge on diesel fuel, on gasoline, and that's the major way we fund our highways. What is happening in this day and age is, because of the increase in fuel prices and the economy and efficiency in automobiles, people are buying less fuel. And what that means for us is we've seen a huge drop in the money that's coming into our coffers. Last year, almost $300 million drop, to the point where today we are only able to take care of 43% of our needs for maintaining our highways. I'm not talking about building anything new. I'm talking about just keeping the roads in good condition and a safe condition. We are facing serious problems, and there are other issues that come into play this, what I won't talk about at this conference. So what does that mean, and why am I talking about that at a low carbon fuels seminar? The issue is, when we look at all of the price pressure points that new regulations come on, we also have to consider these other collateral issues. If gasoline, diesel prices, other fuel prices continue to rise, we are going to see even less money come in, because it does put a squeeze on the economy. People will change their driving habits. And also, as we have new advances in technology and more alternative fuels available, people are switching, and then gasoline doesn't become a good proxy for highway use. So these are other issues that I think many of us in the transportation community want to discuss with all of you who are concerned about how we keep the state moving, because we think these are important issues that we need to put on the table as well. And I said, we don't have a dog in the fight on AB 32 or on low carbon fuel standard at the Commission, but we are very concerned about the impact of increasing costs and prices on those excise taxes, and want to work with everybody to find solutions. There might be a better way, a better proxy, so we can fund our highways. Whether you're driving in a hydrogen car, a Prius, a Volt, an electric car, you're still going to put wear and tear on those highways, and we need to have those conversations as we move forward into this new age. So I really want to commend this convocation today, everyone being here, having these discussions. I think this is very, very important for us to do right now as we move forward, and hopefully we can bring stakeholders together. Again, I think we have a fabulous chance for innovation with 32, opportunity to create jobs and new industries, but we also have to be very, very mindful of the direct impacts on the economy and the collateral impacts on the state as we move forward. And certainly I look forward to working with all of you as in my current post as we move forward. So thanks very much for being here today.
Thank you. Thank you. I'd like to thank the entire panel for your excellent comments. Assembly Member Bonilla is going to have to leave somewhere through the question and answer period. I just didn't want the audience to think she was running away. She has some urgent issues on the budget and needs to leave a bit early. I'd like to follow up actually on comments made by Assembly Member Bonilla about awareness and direct that question to the other two legislators in terms of what do you think the awareness of your constituency is?
Yeah, I don't think a typical constituent is aware of what's happening, and I think that that'll be reflected over time as you see energy prices increase. So the decision's been made. We're heading down a path, and then I think there's going to be a delayed reaction by the public in terms of, why are my energy costs increasing? So.
I think, again, I represent Central Orange County. There was a big debate, at the ballot box, the last election cycle about AB 32. So I think some people know a little bit about that, and it's connected to climate change and greenhouse gases. But this low carbon fuel standard, I could probably quiz 1,000 people, and outside of OCT, I don't think anybody would know about it, or friends at the UPS, but not many. And that's a challenge because, right now the only thing people think about when they think about fuel is, when they're at the gas pump and they're paying what they're paying, the price is high. And I think the public really struggles to understand why prices go up, why they go down. They hear a little bit about it on TV, but I think it's too complicated. What many folks also don't know, even though they're seeing the gas pump or watching TV or listening to the radio, it's only New York that has higher gas and diesel taxes. So we're paying quite a bit in taxes, as well as the quality of our fuel is pretty high, so there's an extra price there. So again, we're all paying quite a bit extra, but aren't really connecting that with the benefits or the long-term strategy on what we're doing.
Thank you. I'd like to direct this question to Mr. Corey. I said, are there any changes that should be made to the program based on information that may not have been available, either in 2006 when we talked about AB 32, or more recently when we introduced the regulations in early 2011?
Yeah. I mentioned as part of the required review of the implementation of the program in 2011, we established a panel of 40 representatives, industry, environmental community, agencies, and others, to really take a careful look at what the status of implementation is. Is the program working? Are fuels, biofuels becoming available? Or is carbon intensity going down? Should changes be made to the implementation schedule? Should other adjustments be made? One of the things we looked at was, one, what's the status of compliance? And the point that I made was the program by design has a fairly modest reduction in carbon intensity in the early years, and I mentioned that there's over-compliance, credits being accrued. So the real question was, as the requirements get more stringent, 2016, 2017 timeframe, are those low carbon intensity biofuels going to be available? And what we talked about was what's happening with respect to venture capital investments and carbon intensity reductions. And we looked at a number of pathways by which industry could comply. Our assessment, this is a staff assessment, was that there are a number of pathways to comply. The regulation does get more stringent. Those investments in next generation biofuels over the next several years will need to occur, and we need to carefully monitor the program. Now there was, and I think we did a good job of representing this in the report, there were different perspectives on that issue, no doubt. But considering the consultation with the advisory panel, as well as a series of stakeholder workshops, we returned to the board this past December with some adjustments to the reg in terms of improved streamlining, in terms of improved opportunities to bring credits into the system, and something that, and improved treatment of crude oil. One thing that we did talk to the board about also was the potential for a flexible compliance mechanism. Should we explore within the context of the regulation a cost containment provision to the degree that there could be, if there was increases in the future in fuel prices, can you, one, monitor it and have some element within the reg? The board directed us to work with stakeholders to really carefully explore this. One, is it needed? Two, to the extent that it is, how might one construct it? So as we move forward on implementation, as I described, we're very mindful in terms of carefully monitoring the implementation, continuing to work with stakeholders on the status, keeping the board informed, and also exploring opportunities for further improvements and refinements.
Well, thank you. As we all know, the LCFS was born out of an executive order in the previous administration. I'm addressing this question to the legislators. What do you think the role of the legislature as it pertains to implementation and oversight ought to be going forward?
Well, it has to work. So you have an order, and it's an executive order, and then we're in charge of looking at the policies and the implications and setting the policies. That's why we're sent to Sacramento, and I think that so it's about how, what will be a functioning process, what will represent our constituencies, and I think that you face a real challenge with term limits. You have an enormous turnover up here. I'm new. We're going to see probably 40 or more new assembly members in January. So when I talked about education, it's not just of the public, it's of the representatives. And this is an enormous topic with a lot of implications. So our role, get educated, understand implications of this, implement workable policy that will actually help achieve the success of improving the environment across the board, really, in the state of California.
Thanks.
I first, because I'm going to be term limit out this year, I actually was here when we were doing the low carbon fuel standard, and now the last class that knew how it all came to be, and it was an executive order by Schwarzenegger, but there were actually legislative pieces right before that that failed, because I think in the legislature the bills focused on the topic needed a little bit more work, and the governor, wanting to do his own thing, crafted his own executive order. So I remember that having been here. I think moving forward, the role of the legislature is to provide oversight, and that's something that unfortunately we don't do enough of in the building. We're all too busy cranking out 40 pieces of legislation or so every 2-year period. So we're so busy with that, and we don't really know where we're going to be in 4 or 6 years. So we're not really monitoring our own legislation that gets put into law or executive orders. And I think that's where you as industry partners have a role in letting us know how it's playing out, letting us know if there's an overreach, letting us know if there's something else that we could do, through legislation or independent, to hold agencies like CARB accountable, because we've given them, again, a lot of power and kind of let them do their work, but we need folks, if we're not doing it ourselves, we need people to let us know how they're doing, if there's anything we need to do about it.
Yeah, I would agree that there's a relief valve through the legislature, and that ought to be used, and I think as a result, as Susan Bonilla was saying, is that we have lost a lot of institutional memory. So you don't have the legislative oversight that I think that we've had historically, and we need more of that, of bureaucracies in general in California. So I think it does provide a pathway for making tweaks and adjustments when we see that policy may not be implemented in the fashion that people had hoped.
Thanks. How about one more question, then we'll go to the audience. Will there be sufficient biofuels? And I'm talking about looking out to probably 2015 at this point, to actually have compliance with the program as it is structured today.
It's a really important question. It's a key question that the advisory panel talked about, because as you touched on, the standard gets more stringent, 2015, 2016, 17 timeframe. There are a few things to think about in terms of answering that question. One is, what is the reduction of carbon intensity of the fuels? Because not all biofuels are created alike, and in fact, not all fuels of the range of fuels that we look at, the carbon intensity can vary quite a bit. And then what types of fuels? And as we look at that question, and as we did as the advisory panel, and as we advised our board, what we look to is, what is the current status of the program, and what is the signal that the program is currently sending, and what is the response, the indicators that we're seeing out there. The point that I made, we're early on in the program, we are seeing compliance, in fact, over-compliance. Carbon intensities are lower than we actually had anticipated, seeing CNG, some biodiesel, lower carbon intensity ethanol. But in terms of next generation biofuels, and I think that's part of really what the core of the question goes to, is the looking at the venture capital investments that are taking place. California is a leader in this area. Those making those investments will be the first to tell you that regulatory certainty and standing by standards plays a key role in those investments continuing to be made. As we looked at compliance scenarios, as we looked at cost analysis of different biofuels, both in feedstocks and production, storage, distribution, consulted with the companies. In fact, several participated on the advisory panel. The expectation, and by virtue of specific actions being taken, is those fuels will come to market. Those fuels will be low carbon intensity and allow for a range of compliance paths that'll be available. But it goes without saying, and to me this is a key point that I made earlier, and I think I need to repeat. An effective implementation of the program requires careful ongoing monitoring, careful assessment of the response of industry, the response of the biofuel industry, and that's done in ongoing consultation with stakeholders, a full transparent process, posting of what we're seeing to continue to monitor, because we're really talking several years out. Some actions need to take place in the next few years in terms of those investments, in terms of those biofuel facilities. But our sense is the track and the signal being sent by the regulation is setting the stage for those actions, that compliance, and those biofuels to come here, California, with their associated co-benefits.
Excellent, thank you so much. Just one more question before we go to the audience. Mr. Frommer, are you looking at different mechanisms now? Because if we're in fact successful and continue to reduce fuel consumption, other methodologies of raising those excise taxes. When I say raising, I mean collecting.
Well, we have just completed, the State Transportation Commission, in conjunction with a number of local agencies, a comprehensive 10-year look at our funding needs for California transportation, not just for our highways and transit, but even for local roads. And we are going to be woefully short in that regard. So we are looking. We have not made specific recommendations, but I think there's a lot of things on the table that people have been talking about. One is, do you go to a vehicle miles traveled paradigm where people are basically have some device in their car, and every year, how many miles you travel on California highways, you'll be assessed for that in lieu of an excise tax, and that would, that covers everybody, but it also creates problems with privacy and maybe more costly for people who have longer commutes and business people, so it's controversial. There are looking at other types of fees or taxes that could be raised that would help us fill that gap, but politically there are no easy ones to do, but we are now studying that phase of it. We want to make some recommendations to the legislature. At the end of the day, the Transportation Commission obviously cannot adopt any fees, taxes, or other revenue enhancements on our own. We'd have to have that by either a vote of the legislature or the vote of the people. But it's important to have these discussions as time goes along, because everything that puts pressure on these fuel prices to have these impacts, and we're trying to get ahead of that curve so our highways are not crumbling and you don't all come to us and say, you know, why didn't you tell us that our roads are where we're going broke in terms of being able to fix our roads?
Well, thank you. I'd now like to take some questions from the audience. We have Christina, who has a microphone, and as you raise your hand, we'll have Christina go up and provide you with that microphone.
There's two Christinas.
Right.
Two mics.
All right. Any questions from the audience? Right here.
Hello, my name is Andreas Klugescheid. I'm Vice President Governmental Affairs with BMW Group, the German car manufacturer. I'm actually located here in Sacramento, so I'm running the office here, also taking care of other states like Mexico, Latin America, and so on. I'd like to take the opportunity to first of all pay my respect and say congrats to California for the low carbon fuel standard. This is something that is really another proof of California leading the pack. And it is something that the rest of the world is actually looking at. It's not unique though, because in Europe we have the Fuel Quality Directive and the Renewable Energy Use Directive, which basically sets the same goals, 10% carbon content reduction by 2020. So it's important to see that California is actually very active in the field, but you are not alone, right? So that is one message that I would like to place here. The other message is that the European Union was doing that because we all in Europe believe in the integrated approach. So car manufacturers are doing their bit in reducing the carbon emissions from their cars. Oil industry and other stakeholders have to do the same. So the directives that I was mentioning were part of that integrated approach, that all stakeholders have to actually comply with their responsibilities. So that is another important point to make here. The third point that I would like to make is about the process. When I'm coming from Germany actually, so I'm used to German politics and how politics are done in Germany. And I can only say that specifically ARB has been, for my personal taste, very open in terms of stakeholder integration. The way they do politics and regulations here, for me from Germany, is a huge surprise actually. So the integration of stakeholders is something that I'm not used to in my country, I have to admit. The other point is that when you look at the event today, for example, we do not have any car manufacturer on the panel, which comes as a surprise to me actually, because fuel in California also implies to some degree transportation, cars, and so on and so on. So I would have appreciated if OEMs like BMW, but any other really, would have been part of that panel as well. The last point that I would like to make is something that Assemblymember Bonilla was mentioning. I'm sad that she's gone already, but she was referring to her 2000 Honda minivan that she's driving, right? And I'm not sure how much legislators and assembly members are actually earning, but my assumption is that she could probably buy a more current model, and the fuel efficiency of that more current model would be probably like 20, 30, even 40% better. So she could afford probably a little bit of more expensive fuel then.
Thank you.
We're living within our means.
BMW making minivans.
Can I comment to that? Because I just bought a Dodge Charger. It's got the new Pentastar engine. It's a 4,000-pound car. It's got an 8-speed German transmission in it, and I've gotten 32 miles to the gallon on the highway. So for a big car, it's incredibly fuel efficient. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. Great strides in fuel efficiency, and hence the problems for Mr. Fromer. Go ahead.
Hi, good morning. My name is Dolores Santos, and I work for Flyers Energy. We're a Northern California distributor, and we live and breathe this every day. My job is to buy fuel for the company and distribute it. We are a very forward-thinking company. We have solar panels on all our retail sites. We spent millions of dollars on a corn ethanol plant in Central California. And now corn ethanol is a bad thing. CARB wants sugarcane ethanol from Brazil to meet the mandates. We are looking at investing in biodiesel. We're trying to blend as much as we can so we can accumulate credits as we are an obligated party. Unfortunately, CARB's not looking at much over a 5% biodiesel blend because of NOx issues. So it becomes very difficult for us, as we're not a refiner, we're just a shipper, but we are obligated because we're buying product from the refiners and they're passing that obligation on. It's becoming increasingly difficult for us to figure out ways to meet the mandate and accumulate the credits because alternative fuels just are not available. We can talk about it, but it's very difficult to get alternative fuels other than biodiesel in California right now to meet the mandate. We're working on a cogen unit for biogas at our Calgren plant to help lower our CI value, but we're not going to be able to compete with sugarcane ethanol from Brazil. I'd just like to finish my comment by saying I don't think the general public really understands how difficult it is to get that gallon of fuel to the locations. And I drive a Prius, and I get 50 miles a gallon.
Thank you. Any other questions from the audience?
I just really want to quickly react to on this subject of alternative fuels. We have a few factors to look at. One, is it available, but also the quantity, because sometimes you can't get the quantity that you need, and then at what price. And I'm just hopeful that CARB, as you continue to do all this monitoring, that there's some flexibility in some of these timelines and restrictions, because if the quantity is not there or the quality and the prices is too far out there, we need to be mindful of that.
Well, thank you. Thank you for the questions as well. I'd like to thank the panel for an excellent job in setting the stage for the rest of the discussions today. I really think we've done a really good job of letting people understand what the basis for the follow-on discussions will be. Thank you very much. If you folks would just give us a moment, we'd like to invite the panel 2 speakers up to the stage, and we'll resume in a few minutes.